He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a caregiver. He wasn't even a family friend. He was Richard Caldwell's own younger brother. For months, Roy Caldwell spent nearly every day with 77-year-old Richard, convincing him that the one person caring for him the most only wanted his money. Then came a brand new will. Overnight, Richard's $2.2 million estate was no longer going to his devoted son, James. It was left to Roy's own son instead. It looked like the ultimate act of family betrayal, but inside the courtroom, an unbelievable truth changed everything. The man everyone believed was the mastermind had been manipulated too. Stay with us until the very end, because today's story proves that the most devastating inheritance fraud doesn't always have just one victim. Sometimes the person helping destroy a family has already been trapped by someone even closer. Richard Caldwell was 77 years old and had spent his career as a structural engineer in Denver, Colorado, retiring in 2015 after 4 decades of work that had left him financially secure and deeply proud of what he had built. His estate, including his home in a quiet neighborhood he had lived in for 30 years, 2 investment accounts, and a rental property on the outskirts of the city, was valued at $2.2 million. His wife had passed in 2018, and his son James, 46, had taken on the informal role of managing his care and finances almost immediately after, visiting multiple times each week and ensuring his father remained comfortable, engaged, and connected to the people around him. Richard's younger brother Roy, 71, had maintained a pleasant but distant relationship with Richard throughout their adult lives. They spoke at family gatherings and called on birthdays, but had never been especially close. When Roy began visiting Richard more frequently in early 2022, James was initially pleased. His father had been lonely since his mother died. A brother's companionship seemed like something that could only help. Roy's son, whose name was Derek Caldwell, 43, had been in significant financial trouble for over 2 years. He had accumulated gambling debts and 2 failed business loans that had left him unable to meet his basic obligations. He had approached Roy's father multiple times for help, and Roy, who had limited resources of his own, had been unable to provide what Derek needed. Derek had then suggested a different kind of solution, one that would take longer to execute, but would deliver far more than Roy could ever give him directly. Roy coached his father carefully. He told Roy that James had been speaking to financial advisors about ways to take control of Richard's estate before Richard died. He told Roy that James had been looking at care facilities. He told Roy that the family deserved better than watching Richard's money go to a son who had only ever been motivated by inheritance. Roy, who loved his brother and himself was being manipulated by someone he trusted completely, began to believe what he was being told. Over the following months, Roy spent nearly every afternoon with Richard. He repeated Derek's narrative slowly and consistently, never aggressively, always framed as concern. He told Richard that he had heard James discussing his accounts with an attorney. He told Richard that James had been asking neighbors about Richard's daily habits. He told Richard that a man who truly loved his father would not be so interested in knowing exactly what everything was worth. Richard was not a man who was easily moved by emotional arguments, but he was a man who had been widowed for 4 years, who relied on James for practical support but missed the companionship of his own generation, and who was spending his afternoons with the one person who seemed to understand him without agenda. The stories Roy told him did not arrive as accusations. They arrived as quiet, concerned observations from a brother who had known him for 70 years. By the summer of 2022, Richard's relationship with James had changed in ways James could not fully account for. His father became guarded during conversations about finances. He began asking James pointed questions about whether he had spoken to anyone about the estate. He told James once with an unfamiliar coldness that he had always known James was practical about money. James did not understand where any of it was coming from. In August of 2022, Roy arranged for a mobile notary and a document preparation service to visit Richard's home on a Wednesday morning. The document was a complete will revision. It removed James entirely and named Derek Caldwell as sole beneficiary of the full estate. Richard signed it. No attorney was present. James was not notified. In August of 2022, Roy arranged for a mobile notary and a document preparation service to visit Richard's home on a Wednesday morning. The document was a complete will revision. It removed James entirely and named Derek Caldwell as sole beneficiary of the full estate. Richard signed it. No attorney was present. James was not notified. Richard Caldwell passed away in January of 2023. The revised will was submitted to probate within the week. James received a letter from the estate attorney informing him he had no claim under the current document. James retained attorney Paul Watkins, a probate litigator in Denver with 16 years of experience. Paul began investigating immediately and made a discovery that reframed the entire case within 2 weeks. He obtained Roy's phone records through an early discovery request and found a pattern of calls between Roy and Derek in the months preceding every significant shift in Richard's behavior toward James. The calls were frequent, sometimes daily, and had increased sharply in the weeks before the will signing. Then Paul interviewed Roy directly in the presence of Roy's own attorney. What emerged from that conversation was not what Paul had expected. Roy was confused and frightened. He had believed genuinely and completely that everything Derek had told him about James was true. When Paul laid out the full timeline and showed Roy the phone records, Roy began to understand for the first time that his own son had used him as a tool. Roy retained separate counsel and agreed to cooperate fully with the probate proceedings. He provided a sworn statement confirming that Derek had been the source of every narrative he had repeated to Richard, that Derek had coached him on what to say and when to say it, and that Derek had arranged the document preparation service and the notary without Roy's full understanding of what the documents contained. The hearing was held before the Honorable Judge Sandra Myers at the Denver County Probate Court. Paul Watkins presented the phone records showing Derek's coordination of the scheme, Roy's sworn cooperation statement, Richard's medical records showing increasing social vulnerability following his wife's death, and a detailed timeline demonstrating how each shift in Richard's attitude toward James had followed directly from Roy's visits. He called Roy to testify. Roy sat in the witness box at 71 years old and told the court what his son had told him to do and why he had done it. He told the court he had believed he was protecting his brother. He told the court he had not understood that protecting his brother had meant destroying his brother's family. His voice broke once during the testimony, and he did not recover it fully before he finished. Derek's attorney argued the will represented Richard's genuine final wishes and that Roy had acted independently out of concern for his brother. Paul Watkins presented the phone records a second time, tracing every call between Derek and Roy to within days of every conversation Roy had with Richard, and asked the court to explain how a scheme that precise could have been the product of an elderly man's independent concern rather than a younger man's deliberate coordination. Judge Sandra Myers ruled the revised will invalid, finding that Richard Caldwell had been subjected to a sustained campaign of undue influence coordinated by Derek Caldwell and executed through Roy Caldwell, who was himself a victim of his son's manipulation. She ordered the estate distributed to James under Richard's previous will. She referred Derek Caldwell to the Denver District Attorney for elder financial exploitation, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 6 years in Colorado State Prison. Roy Caldwell was not charged criminally, given the court's finding that he had been manipulated and had cooperated fully with the investigation. He attended the sentencing hearing and sat in the back of the courtroom without speaking to anyone. James Caldwell settled his father's estate over the following months. He kept his father's house through the winter before selling it in the spring. He said he needed one more season inside it before he was ready. He has not spoken to his uncle since the trial. He has said he does not know how to begin. Richard Caldwell spent 77 years trusting the people closest to him. His brother trusted his son. His son trusted no one. The court sorted out what that chain of trust had cost 3 people in a single family. The only one who walked away without consequences was the one who started it all with a phone call. Would you have recognized what was happening before it was too late? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Court of Shadows for more courtroom drama stories every week.